And then the second thing is that we do what we have to do. We join in putting out the fire in the house. And I will say this, that despite that negative history of the United States of America, there is positives in that there are ideals. We don't meet those ideals, but there are ideals. And we need to work together towards those ideals. One of the things that was amazing about the Muslim Arabs as they converted, because it was a hostile climate, hostile towards the Prophet. One of the most genius things that they did is they always attached themselves to the ideals. When they embargoed the Prophet and his family for 3 years and they cut them off, you know what they did? They got in the middle of the square and they said, "You're Arabs. You love your family. You love to give the poor. Are you really going to leave your family members to starve here?" And Abu Jahl, the infamous pharaoh of the Muslims, he tried to get up and say, "No, this," and they just kicked them down. And everyone just said, "Yeah, you're right. We are Arabs, and we really do take care of it. We can't keep Muhammad and his people out like that." And they flipped the embargo. Right? So we need to be people who call towards those ideals because we agree with those ideals. And we ask Allah that He protect us and He strengthen our faith and strengthen our faith. Forgive me for taking so long. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu wa sallam ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi.
Assalamu alaikum, peace be upon you all. My name is Zainab Salman, and I just want to kind of caveat, I asked to speak last, so it's not just because I'm a woman up here and I'm speaking. I just wanted to throw that out there, just in case there's any, misunderstanding about that. So I actually wanted to thank the Tawheed Center and thank the community also for having us speak to the community on this auspicious panel. These are my peers. I learned immensely from them. And I learned from all of you. Thank you, State Representative, for coming as well. It's very nice to see you here. And I just kind of want to wrap up what Imam Dawood and Taysir had been mentioning and kind of bring it together, because I think that there's an element of other advice for a certain segment of the population that I really want to focus on. So by background, I'm a history teacher. I've been teaching history for almost 10 years now. World history, US history, a little bit of everything. And one of the things that I wanted to kind of highlight, which Imam Dawood was saying, is that, and to kind of wrap this up, is that it's really important that we understand our history and that we have to snap out of this historic amnesia that we're in, especially with everything that we're seeing out in the news and just in society in general. That we are not the only people to suffer or to feel this immense backlash, or to be stereotyped, or to have bigoted comments made against us. We're in the wave of the trajectory, right? That this is something that has happened before. It's happened to several other segments of the population, to several other groups, and we have to understand that we are part of this history. Now, does that mean that we just kind of stop and say, well, there's really nothing I can do about it because it's inevitable and it's going to happen and it's just going to get worse? Absolutely not. And I think that that's what my two brothers have been saying up here, is that a part of our task at this moment, which is a really crucial moment, is that number one, from a religious perspective, is that we understand what our religion is telling us, right? It's not enough for us to be, Muslims who, my parents were Muslim, and, this is how I practiced Islam, and this is how I saw them practice Islam in their home countries, and I'm going to try to implement that here. Absolutely not. For every single time and every single place that we're in, we have to understand how can we most authentically represent our religion in the time and place that we are in. I work with the youth quite often. I'm a high school teacher. There are Muslim youth that are coming to me all the time, and one of the things that really struck me recently is somebody had asked me, a young college student, we met up for coffee, and she was really worried. And I said, what's going on? And she's like, I think about this all the time, that, why am I born in this time, right? It's really hard out there. And how come God placed me in this time and not another time where it was easier? And my response to her, and I think that two things. Number one, it's really important that we understand the voices of the youth in our communities, because these are youth that are growing up post 9/11. They didn't experience the post 9/11, backlash, or just kind of the sentiments that were going on. And so this is actually very, very new to them, right? Growing up in very, isolated communities perhaps, and not really seeing the broader community. So she asked me this, and she said, it's so difficult. How am I going to do this? And my response to her was a response that, my teachers have told me, and my parents have told me, and my elders have told me, and my peers have told me, is that this is the best time for you because this is the time that God has put you in. And because God has put you at this time, there are two things that you have to do. Number one, you have to build, right? You have to build. You have a responsibility to build. And it's not just buildings that we build or mosques that we build, but it's relationships that we build. And it's alliances that we build. And it's coalitions that we form. And it's knowledge that we are constantly building and building upon. That's the first thing. And number two is this idea of, spreading goodness wherever you are, right? Spreading goodness wherever you are. For every one hateful act that's out there, I can guarantee you, you will hear at least 5 or 6 or 10 positive experiences as well. So is there hate out there, and is there a lot of negativity out there? Absolutely, but I call upon ourselves to see the good that's out there as well, and be that change and that catalyst of good as well. That's extremely important for us to understand. The second thing is that, or the next thing that I want to just highlight is with regards to our children, right? We really have to teach our children our history, the history of our country, right? The history of if you're from a different country, perhaps even the history of your homeland, but definitely the history of the country that you're in right now. And not only that, but it's really, really, really important to teach our children the history of the prophets, right? Because in a multicultural, multi-faith society, I mean, we're, one of the most, I guess, ironic things that, or one of the biggest irony for me is that a lot of this Islamophobia and this anti-Muslim rhetoric, it's kind of coming upon, this time period where we are going to be celebrating the birth of 2 prophets, right? So next week, December 25th, is when in the Christian faith, you celebrate the birth of Jesus, right? A prophet that we as Muslims absolutely believe in and love and respect and revere. And actually, the next day after that, on December 26th or 27th, according to the lunar calendar, Muslims are celebrating the birth of the Prophet Muhammad, right? And so it's really ironic that this clash that's going on out there is at, we're coming upon this at the birth of 2 really, really, really important individuals in our history. And we have to, like Imam Dawood said, and like Tazir had mentioned, we have to call upon ourselves and our communities and our peers and our friends to the highest ideals of our faith, to the highest ideals of our country, and then to the highest ideals of humanity as well. That's very important. And the last thing that I want to say is, we can have these talks, which is fantastic, right? And it's really important that we stay informed and updated, and that we understand, we are in these settings where we learn our history and we learn our faith. That's absolutely one part of our task right now, brothers and sisters. We have to do that. The other part that we have to do is create and form and invest in real, organic relationships with our community, right? Gone are the times where we are just within our own faith group, right? Or our own ethnic group, or from the countries that we're from. I'm going to only be with people from this country and not from the other country. We don't have time for that, right? We don't have time for that. We have to really invest in organic relationships with your neighbors, with your community, with your politicians, with people that are working on the grounds. And one of the most remarkable things for me in these past few weeks and these past few months, and just kind of taking a look at what everybody's doing, each and every single one of us in this room has a role to play, right? We have to figure out where our touch point is. If your touch point is, well, the only thing that I have influence is over my children and my children's friends, by all means, make sure you invest in those relationships and that you teach them, right? And that you take them out and you have them involved in community service. and you are involved with those children in the greater community. If you're a touch point, well, the only people that I can, have coffee with or speak to or invest in those relationships are the people that are at my work and my colleagues, by all means, that's what you should do, right? We really have to create these authentic relationships because that's the only way that we can grow as a community, not just a Muslim community, but a community here in Michigan and a community in America. And that's really how we'll counter the narrative that's out there, right? By these real, authentic stories and relationships that we have. And finally, the last thing that I want to say to the Muslim parents in this room, teach your children of the Prophet ﷺ and teach them about God. And let them know that your Prophet, Muhammad ﷺ, experienced all of this. He experienced Islamophobia. He experienced Islamophobia in the middle of the desert in the Arabian Peninsula in the 7th century. He experienced it, right? He was kicked out of his own home, and he had an economic sanction placed upon him and his community. He had to leave. He was a refugee, right? He was taken in by a different community. He and that other community that took him in embraced him. Some embraced him, some didn't, right? We have to remember that's part of the story as well, right? How did he deal with that? We have to remember that our Prophet Muhammad ﷺ went back to his home, right? And how did he deal with, in a very magnanimous way, with the same people that kicked him out? We have to understand the history of the Prophet ﷺ, and we have to teach our children that as well, right? That this is all a part of the human experience, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to us in the Quran, God says to us two things. The first is what Taysir mentioned, that God will test you with a part of fear. وَلَنَبْلُوَنَّكُمْ بِشَيْءٍ مِّنَ الْخَوْفِ. Right? A part of fear. So you might be fearful for a while, right? Or you might not be fearful. But there's a part of fear that God will test you with. And what is our response? And the second thing that I want to end with is that Allah tells us in the Quran that, do you think, in Surah Al-Ankabut, do you think that you will believe, you will say that you believe and God will not test you? This is a test. Perhaps it's a test for us to reach out to others. Perhaps it's a test for us to have good character and spread that good character. Perhaps it's a test for us to build those bridges. That's all part of this life that we're in. And we hope that we pass these tests with grace, and we pass these tests with mercy, and the tests that we pass, that inshallah it will only create a better community for not just Muslims, for every single person that we meet, for the Muslims in our community, and the Christians in our community, and the Buddhists in our community, and the Jews in our community, and the atheists in our community, and that we are able to really enjoy, not necessarily enjoy, but we're able to live in an inclusive society. And those are ideals, but ideals are things that you have to work on. And so inshallah we can work on those, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us strength. And thank you again for having me.
Jazakallah khairan. Thank you, all three of you, so much for speaking and taking time out. At this time, we will try to do question and answers. Once again, there are papers and pens going on. Obviously, if you feel comfortable, feel free to raise your hand as well. And we can certainly recognize you. You guys can ask those questions. Just before I'll kick it back to the panelists in a second. There's a few more people we want to recognize in the audience. We had David Green, Gillian Tulwar there from the Socialist Democratic Club, and Steve Hart and Michelle Hart, who are here from the Farmington Democratic Club as well. I'm sure there's many other people who are here as well today. If we didn't mention you, please forgive us. We're really happy that everyone is here today, and feel free to ask any questions. That's what they're here for. So without any further ado, I think we have some questions. As they come up, feel free to answer them. If you want to share these questions along with the other panelists, feel free. There's no problem with that at all. One question I wanted to pose before we got to the written questions was a question that I've been getting a lot as well is a lot of times there's been a lot of questions about how can I be safe? Especially recently with a lot of the racial attacks that have been happening across the country. A lot of people do fear for their comfort, especially if they're visibly Muslim, women who are wearing the scarf, or men who wear, men who have a long beard, or they might wear a hat, or they might be wearing a turban on their head. And unfortunately, our Sikh brothers, they also are the target of these, inappropriately, because people do look at them and they assume that's a Muslim, and they're not. People do feel for their safety. Do any of our panelists have anything that they could, expand on, or, anything at all? This might be Imam who probably question more than anybody else.
There's a hadith that Sidi Taysir made reference to, iqilha wa tawakkal, right? That we tie up our camel and we put our ultimate trust and faith in God. The reality is that you never know, or we never know or could predict or like be mind police to see what someone is thinking that can randomly do something. So we should not live our lives in fear, and I believe that the majority of American people, the majority of our fellow Americans are not going to do us any bodily harm. We're saying that there always could be one or two people, or a few people, I should say, who may want to take out animus towards Muslims, especially with the constant imagery that we see on TV, and as well as the rhetoric from some of our politicians. I gave some advice to us in the Flint community a couple of weeks ago, and from the reports that we've gotten nationwide from CARE, many of the verbal threats that have been made, and even a higher percentage of physical attacks have actually taken place towards women wearing hijab. So what I told I gave some advice to the people in the Flint community. One, that if someone is like making threatening gestures to you, especially if you're in your car, like don't talk back or don't like yell back at them. Pick up 911 and call the police. Let them do their job. We have 2 police officers right here. Road rage, or if it's like someone yelling at you at the store. We had complaints a few days ago of a white male at a Costco's in our local area got in the face of a muhajjaba, a sister that wears a headscarf, and started yelling at her and calling her a terrorist, and she got very frightened and scared. Now the sad part about it is there was a cashier close by and other shoppers that sat back and watched it and did absolutely nothing. At that point, she, and I advised her to try to disengage. It's hard because sometimes people are paralyzed by fear, and immediately call the police, or walk up to the security guard, like in the store. But it's really shameful that people sat back and watched it. Also, people at their workplaces, but especially college students, and I say this. There is nothing wrong with you leaving your job or leaving your class in public and having a co-worker or a brother at the school escort you to your car and make sure that you drive off safely. Forget about all the gossip stuff, or maybe thinking, oh, well, someone might think we're dating or whatever, because we know our community sometimes, the namima in our community is something else. Safety comes first, and shame on anyone who wants to start a rumor because they saw Fulan bin Fulan walking you to your car when you leave your night class at Wayne State. But in these days and times, I really do advise sisters, especially muhajjabat, that when you are leaving your classes or work and it's dark outside, we know that in this time of year it gets darker earlier when the semester starts back, have someone escort you to your car and make sure that you drive off safely. That you're able to drive off safely. Don't pull off to the side of the road if you have someone who is, especially in a dark area, when you have someone yelling at you, right? If you have to pull off, drive somewhere where it's lighted and there's people walking around, so drive off or slam on brakes and go to the side of the road. Please don't do that. But call the police. The police are our public servants. They're here to protect and serve us. We should call 911. Do you have my back on that, Chief? See, if the Chief is over here, he gave me a thumbs up on that, see? 2 thumbs up. 2 thumbs up.
Can I read this question? So this question is, what should we do to prevent Islamophobia? How do we react when if someone says something offensive? I wear hijab, my parents worry about me going out. How do we explain to them not to be scared, but to be confident? So that second one ties in with this one, but I wanted to just touch on the first one, which, some of these really complicated matters, there's no one solution, right? So it's like, how do we get world peace? Well, that's a very difficult and tall order, and it's important to ask, but it also takes a lot of work and a lot of thought. I've been thinking a lot about how to answer this question because it gets asked a lot. And the best answer I've been able to come up with over the last few years is that there isn't one thing. There's an array of things that we can do, right? And one of the biggest mistakes we make as a community is we believe that there's one answer. And we invest all of our resources as one person or as one group into one type of answer, right? So maybe my family thinks the best way to solve this is this, and we put everything behind that. Well, we need to understand that it's multi-pronged, right? So at one end of the spectrum, we have to come out and we have to struggle against this in public. We need people who are, on the media screens speaking about what this hatred is, and we have to be able to respond. We need people who can litigate and bring lawsuits against corporations and in places of employment that are discriminating against Muslims. We need people who are working heavily at the state and the national level and the international level to address these types of concerns. We need people who stand up in the classroom and say something racist is said in class. We all need to join other movements to fight for social justice. All of that is true. And then, at the same time, it's also true that we need to individually educate ourselves about Islam. And we need to learn about Islam. We need to be able to address these questions when they're asked. And so we can't kind of say, oh, we're doing this, we don't have to do that. And definitely we can't remove ourselves from praying to God. And these things are not, they're not mutually exclusive. It's not a zero-sum game. It's interesting that reliance on God, and Imam al-Ghazali said, the title of the chapter is Monotheism and Reliance. That's actually the title of the chapter. Monotheism and reliance. Because what he says is, if you're not fully reliant on God, that's a form of polytheism. Right? Because he says that you think someone can harm you or someone can do anything if God doesn't want to or doesn't will that. Right? And so the other end is prayer. And yes, part of it is reaching out to your neighbor. There isn't one answer. Like if we all went out and we were kind to our neighbors, that wouldn't solve Islamophobia. There are people who are making money off of Islamophobia. There are people trying to get elected off of Islamophobia. You being nice to your neighbor is one way of addressing it. But that's not, forgive me, certain politicians, we don't need to use names, they're not interested in whether you're kind to your neighbor or not, right? Because they're trying to get elected, right? And so putting you under the bus is part of that process, right? So we have to address that on multiple prongs. The second part of the question, there's another question like it, maybe I can leave it to someone else to address it.
Oh, sure, absolutely, go ahead.
My question is, in my observation, I'm a teacher and I'm also a mother of 4 black children. My husband is white. So, it's been an interesting ride from that perspective. All of a sudden, when you adopt children, you need to go in our culture. And in the most sense of my children, and that there's a racism or whatever it is, and we learn that daily watching it, when that was not my experience from my husband, growing up in New Zealand. He was in the mountains, he was a whole different culture, and we lived and met in the largest Muslim nation in the world in Indonesia for years. So we have a beautiful, beautiful thing in our life. So I was wondering that is completely understanding of Islam. But my question is, we are actually not, in my observation, we're passionately about diversity and integration and our cultural passion. But my observation is that the hostilities I observe in the culture, not that I agree with the race thing, that it's the larger picture, but currently with the Islamophobia, other religions is fearful of Islam, and Islam is vice versa. When I was in an Islamic nation, they said things about Christians that I had to wait for. I'm not Christian, but I was like disqualified some of the statements that we made and some of the beliefs. So my overall point is that in this community, that's what I want to address it, that's where I live, and that's why I don't do that. This seems to be a very great issue for a positive or more. Is there a possibility of having
I think that was a beautiful comment. And I know that some of the communities are picking that up. I mean, the mosque in Bloomfield Hills recently had a coffee hour. The community in Canton, recently we met with a couple of different members from different churches at Panera the other night, and it was a fantastic conversation, and everybody had a wonderful time. So yeah, it's a great idea. Yeah. Yes. Sure. Yeah.
If I may, my name is Teresa Rich. I am a member of the Farmington Hills City Council and certainly not a stranger to the Tawhid Center. I'd like to address your question. In the Farmington Hills community, we speak 107 languages in our homes. We have tremendous diversity, and it's something we're proud of. And just this last week at the council table, I spoke about the importance that in Farmington Hills, we're a community that thinks first of ourselves as neighbors. We are not an anti-type community, despite all the foolishness we're seeing in the press. In this community, we have a multicultural, multiracial council that meets regularly, does wonderful work. The next event they'll have is in honor of Martin Luther King Jr. In January. My first visit to Tawhid was through multicultural, multiracial, when we had a tour of houses of worship. And that day we went to the Tao Temple and to the Mormon church that's in my neighborhood that I didn't even know was there. And here, and the Unitarian Universalist Church. And they've done that a number of times. So in this community, does what you're asking for happen? The answer is yes. There's opportunity, and I would like to also build on what you said, which is invite people here to please join in our Farmington Hills boards and commissions. That's the best way for you to get involved, for us to build greater relationships, and to build greater community. Thank you for your time.
So I'm going to go ahead with the next written question. A few of my white American classmates told me to reconsider wearing hijab, the headscarf. I wear hijab because they think that this because they think that just because of this garment, I might become a target for hate crime. Do you know how I can avoid being a target of hate crime? So I think with the issue of hijab, which has been coming up a lot, and I kind of didn't want to go into it, but I guess I will. You know, I'm going to say two things. Number one, personally, I believe that hijab or the headscarf is an obligation. Do I condemn women for not wearing it? You have your relationship with God, and that's your relationship with God, and I'm at one place, not necessarily a good place, and you're somewhere else, and we're just working together towards knowing and loving God. I'm gonna say that first. Second of all, with hijab, because I have had a lot of young girls come up to me and ask me this, and I'll say, number one, it depends on who I'm talking to, right? So that's really important. If we're living in these communities, for example, I'm in Canton, there's Farmington Hills here, and feel a level of safety, then I think that you should just kind of go with however, whatever community that you're in. Are there places in America that, are more racist and it's unsafe, and a woman might have to alter the way that she wears the headscarf, for safety? I would say, if that's what you need to do, then that's what you need to do, because the basic premise of our religion is the preservation of life. So I think, it's a case-by-case situation. I'm not going to come out with a blanket statement and say, no, like, stop being fearful, and, you must wear hijab, and you must wear it this way, this, that, the other. That's not my place. And I'm also, on the flip side, not going to say, no, the climate is really bad, and you have to take it off, and, it's unsafe. Personally, when everything had happened, I actually made a conscious decision, and I haven't really made this conscious decision in a really, really, really long time, that I'm going to keep my scarf on. And I was actually in California a few weeks ago, just about 2 weeks ago in the Bay Area, and I frequent the Bay Area, and I've never felt any sort of, I've never felt unsafe. But for the first time in my life, I actually was very conscious of my scarf. And it was very different for me, right? It was an extremely different experience for me to be conscious of this thing on my head. That it's a non-issue for me, right? Wake up, before you leave the house, you put it on, you go through your day, you come back, you take it off. It's clockwork by now. But I actually felt very conscious of it. And so I thought to myself, if I feel conscious of it, and I feel very strong in my faith, then I can't imagine what others are feeling. So with this, I'll say, know yourself, know your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and whatever decision it is that you do, make sure